Kappel, Sofia Kappel. And our moderator for tonight, culture and film critic, Kay Young.
So I guess we should just get right into it. Ninja, what made you want to tell a story about the porn industry?
I've been interested in porn as a subject my whole adult life. It started when my boyfriend at the time showed me a porn film. I was 16 and I was already then, I was like a very engaged feminist. And at that time in Sweden, this was around like year 2000, porn was considered very only being degrading towards women. So that was the only way I could see it. But I also, there was a lot of things, I realized the gap between how he was raised sexually and what he expected from sex versus me. And because all him and his guy friends, they all had this like VHS cassettes that they shared and commented, and me and my friends, we didn't even, we didn't even pretend. I said that we masturbated, and we had this very like innocent and romantic view on sex. So that made me so angry because I felt it was so unfair, or and also I was frustrated for like on the grown-ups for not talking about this. I became engaged in like an anti-porn activist group. I was part of that for a while, but I became a little bit older and I started to, and the thing was, even though I felt like I was upset, I was also secretly turned on by it, so I like kept consuming porn, or like secretly looking at it, when my boyfriend was asleep. I was like pissed at him for watching it, but then I still watched it myself. And then, but then I became more, nuanced and aware of. I felt that there was so much like focusing on the victim, always looking at women as victims, and I felt that there was a lack of positive representation of female sexuality, and I became interested in feminist pornography. So I was part of that community for a while, and then I also started to feel there was something there that felt a bit, that we were talking about our porn as being liberating, and it was this like white middle class privileged women doing like artsy fartsy porn that we felt was like, this is feminist liberating, but the porn that those other women, the mainstream porn, that's oppressing towards them. But I started to like question, because sometimes like the content was exactly the same, it was just different lighting, so I wrote an essay about, I studied porn at university, or at gender studies at university, wrote an essay about porn, and I had already done, I was already in film school, because I started film school because I wanted to direct porn, feminist porn. And when I watched all like these porn clips that I was writing about, I became so curious to understand, especially the women and like who they were, but also to understand the dynamics, because I could see, like, as from a filmmaker point of view, how okay, there's a cut here, like they're going from a close up, and then they're like moving the camera around, and what's happening in between those takes, and and I've always been so interested in like stereotypes and social images, and like these people, like a lot of that porn were really like gender stereotypical, and they were playing these fantasies, but I was like, I was interested in when they go in and out of character, and who are they behind that. So I made a short film with the same title, and I tried to do as much research as I could from watching all documentaries and reading books, and and then it got a lot of attention, and I got into Cannes and won a prize, and to Sundance, and I kept saying in interviews that, you know, yeah, I wanted to portray the real people behind the porn stereotypes. But I had actually never met anyone, because we don't have a porn industry in Sweden at all. So I had never met anyone from the industry, I'd never been on a porn set. It was all made of like these, you know, fantasies or just, so I was like always worried that someone from the actual industry would like go out, like call my bluff. Yeah, I decided to do like a feature-length version and that like did it properly. So then I went to LA 2014 and started to do research, and that like was a 5-year period where I was going back and forth between Sweden and LA and developed the script from that research.
This is a really interesting backstory, I gotta tell you. And Sofia, this is your very first acting role. Yeah, I mean, it's quite an audacious debut. What made you interested in the script?
Oh, is this on? Hello? No, I'm not the whole person. Hey, hi. Oh, really loud. What was that? Sorry for speaking Swedish. So actually, the script wasn't what made me end up at the audition. I didn't read the script before I got to the audition. I didn't get it. But Ninja had been looking for the main character for over 1.5 years. And she had auditioned thousands of girls in Sweden. So she had started sending out character description of who she was looking for to people that had big networks, and one of them happened to be a club manager in Stockholm. And I like clubbing, or I liked at least at the time. And I was also in therapy at the time for body dysmorphic disorder. So I was constantly putting myself in situations that made me feel uncomfortable, because that's how that therapy works. So when I met this club manager, he was like, oh, I have a friend who's making a movie. I think you have what she's looking for. Would you like to audition? And my initial thought was absolutely not. So I said yes. And then he connected me and Ninja told me more what the movie was about. I remember when I got the message from Ninja, and part of me was a little bit offended by the club manager. I was like, what do you mean? You think I have what she's looking for? I'm glad that he saw that in me and that Ninja did too. But yeah, that's how I ended up on the audition piece.
Awesome. And Ninja, you mentioned a second ago that you were worried initially after your short film that people in the industry would call your bluff. And obviously this film features a lot of actual industry professionals. Can you talk about how you were able to get them to participate?
Yeah, it was very different. Some of them were, like Mark Spieler, for example, I met him already 2014. And quite early I wrote him into the script, and I kept saying to him, like, you have to play him, like, I'm not going to accept a no. So yeah, he agreed to that. So it's like, it really varied. Some of them were people that I had met and were very inspired by and wrote into this, like, had like a character based on them in the script early. And some were just, we had a casting process where some just came to like a regular casting. But I think but there was a lot of, like, most people that I met were curious and felt that it was like about time that and also, like, the industry is really, there's a lot of stigma, and still are not, they feel like they're not being portrayed right, or like not getting respect from the mainstream society. So like, the more this bridge between like adult industry and mainstream industry could merge, or like, that was something that, like, almost everyone was very supportive of.
Perfect. And one of the things that's really interesting about the movie is how much of it is about the business of porn. Can you talk to me a little bit about the dynamics of the industry?
What what do you mean?
Well, in terms of Bella's kind of discovery of figuring out who the power players are in the industry and what she needs to do and who she needs to speak to and whose graces she needs to get into. Can you talk about figuring out that journey and replicating that on screen?
Yeah, I think that was like, I kept hearing the same story over and over again. I kept hearing, you know, Mark Spiegler is the only really good agent. If you want to be a star, that's the one, like, he's the one you should be with. I kept hearing, like, yeah, you have to, like, put more and more things on your list in order to build a name for yourself, because, you know, like, most of the company shoots pretty hardcore stuff, so if, and the competition is hard, so if you want to, like, build a name, like, it's really, you know, for example, this the anal thing, that's the number one thing, like, are you ready to do anal? If you're not, then it's gonna be much harder. So there are a lot of those things. But at the same time, it's this tricky part where there's also the whole virgin myth of you're worth more the first time. Like, so like your first porn shoot, you're more, you know, worth more, your first anal, the whole, idea about the virgin, and so that you're like this combination of the more you do, you're like some also, you could also be like you were like have lost your, so like don't give away too much too early, keep something up your sleeve for later, like that was things. So all of those, like how it was built, and the whole system around, you know, I started to like really pinpoint how the structure worked. But the thing is, it's really like, it has really changed a lot, especially during the last years with the pandemic, and OnlyFans has really changed the industry a lot. So I think the script that I wrote was, is not like, it's not really represent, or it's like there's parts that have happened after we shot the film that, so it's a little bit out of date, but when I came, it was really mostly men who were in all the power positions, and the women were very, you know, they had an agent who had the model house where they lived, and like the system in different ways kept women apart and made women competitors, and was built up by these men who knew each other since 10, 20 years ago, and usually they were like twice the age of the girls, and of course a lot of that still exists, but it has gotten much, much better lately. And what's also very, you know, because one thing I heard a lot in the beginning was that from men in the industry talking about how, you know, the women always compete and you have to watch out for the other girls, they're gonna stab you in the back, and you know, jealousy and all of that, which I think it's very misogynistic to have that like idea about women not being able to collaborate, but it's also a mechanism that happens when in a system where there are, where the women don't have power. But the more like things have changed during the last years, and the more power like the performer gets, it's been so like interesting and to see how the women, they constantly support each other, and on their own platforms they, you know, put out ads for other like competitors, but they're not like, it's really the opposite, like, so that's also very a positive development.
And Sofia, in the film, Bella says to Mark Spiegler that she wants to be performed because she's a performer, and you yourself now are also a performer. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you got into character?
I mean, I got to go to Los Angeles pretty quick after I got the part, and was very involved in the pre-production, so I got to go to porn sets, so I knew what that was like. At my first day in the US, I went to a porn set, great memory. And I got to interview especially female performers and ask like all of the uncomfortable questions that I really, really wanted to know, but I mean, the type of questions that you would never have the opportunity to ask. But I was also really involved in the casting process, so I think everyone that's in the movie, I mean, except all the extras, that would have been crazy, auditioned with me. So I did like hundreds of auditions. So I had been in character for quite a while, and it was also a huge part of like developing the character Bella. So I had gotten a lot of time to really get to know her, and I really do know her. I was her for a really, really long time. But there were also like physical parts. I got to go to the gym quite a lot so that I would get a bigger butt. I don't know if you can, I mean, this picture is quite new, but I was a lot heavier in the film. So there was a lot of food and a lot of working out. Food I like, working out not so much. I also got to take erotic dancing lessons because I could not walk in stripper heels for the life of me. So I got to practice that and got to practice to like move my body. My body coordination is like really bad, to be honest. So I got to practice that quite a lot because there were a lot of scenes and like camera angles where I had to be in like super weird positions and like folded on the middle. So there were lots of bits and pieces as to how I became Bella. Yeah.
Awesome. And Ninja, one of the things that film tackles pretty early on is the racism of the industry. Can you talk about why you wanted to include that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I knew that I wanted, and I think in all of my films, I try to have this intersectional perspective of, you know, because I'm interested in power and power dynamics, but it's, you know, that's never as easy as there's just like one is the victim and one is the oppressor, but like in different, there's very different types of power structures, yeah, but and I was very shocked actually when I came here to like experience and witness the type of racism that is here. I mean, we of course have racism in Sweden as much as here. It's just like different, and I think it's more targeted maybe to like, I don't know, Middle East people or like, but we don't have the same because of your history with. So like this with like black and white thing is not the same thing in Sweden, and here it was just so explicit and brutal, and just the way it was labeled interracial, but that only meant when one of the performers were black, and also when I came the first time, I think that has changed a bit, but then it was this like rule that everyone just knew and kind of accepted somehow, that, you know, for example, if a girl made the scene, the female performer, if she was like paid like $1,000 for a scene, then the male talent, white, was paid half of that, and if there was like a black male performer, he was paid half of what the white guys paid, or were paid, and it was just all of these things that, was a bit, very shocking, and I felt like, okay, I definitely have to include this, but also the film, and that was really like intention from the beginning to also address, you know, different classes of society, because Bella, she's obviously very privileged. She comes from Sweden, where we have free healthcare and everything, and she's doing this more of like, you know, some kind of something she wants for, you know, identity or like reach her goal, but she comes from a very privileged position, and Joy, her friend, definitely does not, and it's also like, I could see after a while this pattern of, you know, the people in the top, the performers who were more successful usually also came from more privileged backgrounds, and so yeah, I tried to add as many of those layers as possible, and I also think it's very interesting how that dynamic with her friend Bear, that she's doing that interracial scene with, how there's so many, you know, he's both, yeah, how they both are like, who's the victim and who's not in that scene. Like she's really using him, and then at the same time, like the scene, yeah, like I think it just raises a lot of very interesting questions.
And one of the big centerpieces of the film too is that really striking contrast between the king scene that she does versus the gambang scene directly after. Can you talk to me about why you wanted to contrast those two things so directly?
Yeah, that was, I mean, yeah, I think I think it's quite obvious that why it was, because I really wanted to add that abusive scene, because I heard so many of those stories, and but it was really important to show, you know, that, you know, you can still do something that is, you know, violent. You can still do something where the woman is submissive and the man is dominant, or that contains physical aggression or those type of roles, like power plays. You can still do that in a way where it's super ethical and everyone has a great time. And so yeah, like they are mirroring each other, I think, just to like really pinpoint. It's a very pedagogical, like over pedagogical, I think, in a way, but also to show the differences where, you know, when there's more women on the set, you know, women behind the camera, and also in the crew, because it's very, like, a lot of times when I was at a porn set, it was just all these men and then one woman, and she was in front of the camera, and she was usually much younger than them. And even though, if you know, it's of course very rare with that type of abusive scene, it's like the worst example, and most people in the porn industry are nice, you know, would never do something like that. But the dynamic of just having to, you know, one woman being alone and being in that vulnerable position, and is still a problem. And I think a lot of the guys, like, they don't have bad intention, and I also think that they're really not aware of it, but it's a huge difference, I think, if there's a woman or if more women on the team. So that was also something that I wanted to add.
And Sofia, that assault scene was really exciting to watch. What was it like filming?
Awesome. That was actually one of the best days on set for me. A part of that might have been that everyone else was so uncomfortable. No, but that scene was so rehearsed. It's like it didn't just happen that day on set. Especially Bill Bailey, who's like the leader of the two men assaulting Bella. He actually came to our house, and we practiced the scene months prior to actually shooting it. So I was like able to explore what my boundaries were and where my limits were, because I said very early on that I did not want to stunt the scene. I don't think I'm that good of an actor. So I had to have like the physical, but obviously I did not want to get hurt. So we practiced that, and like movie magic is real. So even though it looks very brutal, it truly wasn't. For example, like when my head turns like red and blue, it's not from actually being choked, it's from me like contracting my entire body, but obviously the camera doesn't show that. I think that scene in particular, the mental part was a lot harder, because I had to get into a headspace that was uncomfortable. I mean, 1 in 3 women get sexually assaulted throughout their lifetime, so statistics say that I'm not the only one in this room, but I was able to feel those feelings in a very, very safe environment. One of my closest friends from Sweden had flown in. Ninja had one of her closest friends as support as well. Ravika, who plays Joy, was also on set that day. And we took a lot of measures to make sure that I would not end up being in the same situation as Bella, where there's this illusion that I can say no, but it's really hard to say no. And I think most people can relate to being in a situation where like you kind of want to say no, but you end up saying yes. So instead of having to even use my voice to say cut, even though everyone in the room was allowed to say cut, it would have been enough for me to just make eye contact with one of my friends, and that would have meant cut. So there was a lot of safety measures and everything around and surrounding that scene and that day was like very positive. The other performers were very nice to me in between takes and gave me lots of hugs and compliments, and there was lots of Coca-Cola because I love that, and candy and stuff like that. So everything surrounding that scene was super, super positive. So you don't forget that it's not for real because it is pretend, and I did not get hurt, and it was actually a lot of fun to shoot that scene. Yeah.
And you mentioned that Bella really wanted to say no and didn't feel like she could. Can both of you kind of speak a little bit to how consent operates in the industry?
I mean, it's hard to, like, I cannot, like, speak for the whole industry. Also, it's now been, like, 2 years at least, or, yeah, since I was there. But it's a very sacred, you see that, like, thing, you know, that's because so much of the content is dealing with, you know, power play and physical like painful, like things that are, you know, sometimes pretty violent. So that's of course like super important that you know, that no one is ever, like, everything is consensual. But it's also a little bit of you know, and yeah, like when I interviewed in the beginning, I made a lot of interviews, and you know, almost like everyone said, like, yeah, all the women said, like, yeah, but I can always say no, and I feel like there's, you know, if I would say no, they would immediately cut, and you know, no one would ever do anything against my will. But then when I asked, can you tell me the last time you said no, then almost like so many of them just like answer like, okay, actually I never said it because I don't want to, you know, cause troubles. I don't want to be a burden, or, you know, it's better.
I'm so sorry.
It's the Oscar music.
Should I continue?
We can hear you.
You hear me in the back? No?
Speak loud. Stora bokstäver.
Okay, I'll continue. Do you in the... Okay.
What was I saying? Yeah, like, oh yeah, it's better to just like maybe get it over with, or I'm afraid like they won't hire me again. You know, you don't want to be creating bad vibe. So, and I honestly think that a lot of the men don't understand that or know that, because like men have a tendency, unfortunately, to not really think about things from the female perspective and put themselves in women's shoes. So that is, of course, a huge problem. But yeah, but that is also a little bit, you know, the nature of capitalism in a way, because, you know, most of the things that happens to, like, that are bad in the film that happens to her that is bad, I would like blame, you know, patriarchy and capitalism, rather like with, you know, because these things happens in every industry, and, you know, now we heard so many stories since Me Too about how, yeah, so that definitely has a lot to do with, you know, gender inequality, and also, you know, we live in an economical system where profit over people, and yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, but I would also say that, like, as to consent, it's not like a problem in porn or in the sex industry. I think a lot of people have been, and especially women, in situations where you want to say no, but there's no room for it. And if you're female or part of a minority and you live in a patriarchal world, which we do, you're gonna have to adapt to that. You're gonna have to use different strategies, and sometimes, unfortunately, that means pushing your boundaries in ways that you maybe don't want to. And like, I mean, it goes for a lot of things. How many times has people not like gone on a date with someone and went home with them and like did not want to sleep with them, ended up doing it anyways? I mean, it goes for all parts of life. It's not a problem that's centered in the porn industry. It's every single part of our lives in every industry.
Yeah, and it has so much to do with female gender role, because we're like raised to, I don't know if the Swedish word is like duktig, but that we just like, you know, want to smooth things over, we want to be like proper, we want to be good girls. Yeah, so, and then, you know, that dynamic, and men are being raised to, you know, push and be hunters and, you know, take what they want and, you know, be like masculine and, you know, and all these films, comedies about, you know, a guy like chasing a girl and she says no and he continues, and after a while she thinks it's suddenly like romantic and cute that he just kept going and going. So all those things makes it, that dynamic makes it so, yeah, it's so, it's really like, yeah, really problematic. And I mean, I don't have there's like not one solution to it. We have to work on this on so many levels. That was also, because I felt, you know, the same thing with this film, that I, like the abusive scene, for example, that, yeah, I mean, Sofia, she said yes to a lot of things, we talked about them, and she says, you know, and then she's in the situation where she knows, like, yes, I agreed to that. I said I would do all of those things. There's a whole crew here waiting, you know, every second costs money. Like, if I all of a sudden change my mind, that's gonna be problems for everyone. So you have to like constantly be aware of those things, and we try to, like, because there were some, like, especially one scene that like wasn't, where Sofia didn't feel comfortable, and then we like tried to make sure, like, okay, but how can we change things around and make it work anyway? So yeah, it's just like all these things we need to just like constantly address them and talk about them.
And to skip ahead a little bit, Sofia, in the film, Bella eventually kind of enacts the same violence against this actress Ava that was enacted on her. Can you talk about what her headspace is like at that time? What's she thinking?
I think there's a lot of things going on in Bella's head in that scene. To be honest, I think at the beginning she's just pissed off. I hope that everyone got that, like, she does not have a yeast infection, and Ava is just being a douchebag. And I mean, Ava is not the most likable character, perhaps. So Bella doesn't like her, and I think Bella has tried to like connect with her. So she doesn't like her, and that's like the final straw. But we also know that people who has been abused, it's not uncommon for people who has been through abuse or sexual abuse to reenact that when they grow up, or to kind of pass that trauma on to other people. And I think that's kind of that is what happens. And I think like the entire situation and the headspace she's in, it starts off being mad, and then she's like, yeah, I'm gonna fuck the shit out of her. And it escalates. And when she's looking at herself, there's like a shift where she's like, oh, now I'm in power. And she uses that in the same way as the men use that power on her. But I also think, like, towards the end of that scene, that she regrets what she did, and that she's really upset that she put someone else through that. And I mean, she tries to say I'm sorry, and eventually that also pushes her towards joy, I hope. That's what I hope happens in the end. Because she kind of realizes that all the decisions that she's made so far has only left her lonely and miserable, because she chose profit over camaraderie. and relationships, and that did not, and is not gonna make, I believe, anyone happy in the long run.
Were there any ideas that you had about pornography that changed as a result of working on the film?
Very many. I mean, I was as much of a hypocrite as most people that consume porn are. I thought of myself being this like sexual being, and oh, I'm a woman and I have the power over my own body, and it's cool to be sexual, and fuck all these mostly men that calls people sluts when they're females sleeping with a lot of people, but when there's a man who sleeps with a lot of people, he's a legend. But at the same time, as I was consuming porn and had all these ideas of being like sexually liberated, I had so much prejudice against especially women in porn. And I think that's very easy when you to have prejudice against things that you know very little about. And I knew barely anything about porn, and what I knew about porn I had learned from like 2 documentaries, which in my opinion, at least the ones I've seen, tend to only show the really, really bad parts of porn, and I don't think that that's a fair representation, but that's what I based my opinion on. So I thought that all women in porn must be like traumatized or broken. They must have been like lured into this by someone, or like groomed from a young age. And then I came to Los Angeles and I met all these people, and I was so wrong. And there was like a point where I truly like questioned my entire being, because I was so wrong. I've met all of these super empowered and smart and intelligent women with so much agency, and I realized that the question, like, why do you want to do porn, is so problematic, because it's insinuating that there's something wrong with you for making this decision, and there isn't. I mean, I would never ask someone who works in a supermarket, like, why do you work in a supermarket? Super weird. Because, like, frankly, you wouldn't care. And as soon as there's like a woman who's taking her clothes off, who's like owning her sexuality, it's like, there must be something wrong with you, and there isn't. I met these people that have like PhDs, and I've also met broken and traumatized people, but they're not all centered in the porn industry. That would be crazy if there were, and I think we all know that broken and traumatized people, as well as like really bad people and mean people, they're everywhere. They're not like centered in one industry. They're like on every job. Everywhere. So yeah, a lot of things changed what I think about porn and the people in porn, but also how I view femininity and feminism, like completely changed. And yeah, like pay for your porn, I'll say that.
Okay, this is my last question, it's for both of you. What did working on this film teach you?
So many things. I really learned how to, I learned much more of the American way of seeing things. And then, finally, when I finally, understood it, then I could see things from a completely different angle. And then I'm like, oh, now all these things make sense. Like, now I understand why they say that, why they do that, why they, I just realized that that some of it is completely, for example, Swedish feminism and American feminism is so different, and you draw the complete opposite conclusions based on some ideology, or but to really understand that it's not necessarily one is not wrong or the other one is right. It's just you can see things from so many different angles. So that was one thing. I mean, yeah, so many things. I think one thing that was very, one more important stepping stone for me to, really understand the male gaze and the impact of the male gaze in our culture was, because that was the whole film, the idea from the beginning. I said I wanted to use a female gaze to expose the male gaze. And what I mean with the male gaze is the culture, the historical, that it's been men, owning history and making all the images and stories, so we've learned to see things from their point of view. And as a woman, I still have a very like internalized male gaze, or whatever you want to call it. And one thing was that when we were trying the shots of the film, because I feel like I don't want to reproduce the male gaze, and I don't want to objectify Sofia or Little Cherry. And then, but she was like wearing all these sexy clothes, and she's like a young woman with like an ideal body, like so like of course she's gonna look sexy. And then it was just like I started to like, oh no, she can't be standing like that because then she's looking too sexy. It's gonna be too much male gaze, and because I was like but then after a while I realized like no, but she's just she just is there. She just has a body, and I'm the one who's projecting something on that, and that was like so important for me to like understand, all the levels on this, like how much also what we interpret in an image comes from ourselves, or that how complex it is. But so many things. I mean, it completely changed me as a person and made me so much more humble.
I mean, I learned a lot of things. I think that at a really personal level, the most important was that I learned to trust myself. My confidence was like non-existent prior to this film, and really challenging myself helped me overcome so many things. I think it's very easy to like constrict yourself of what you think that you're capable of. But most of the time we're very wrong about that. And like I even remember the first time Ninja showed me a clip from the movie, and I was like, oh my god, it looks like a movie. He's like, yes, it is a movie. But yeah, it really helped me grow as a person to put myself in someone else's shoes. And Bella really helped me overcome a lot of things I had with body dysmorphic disorder too, because Bella does not have that. And that was great to experience, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity if it weren't for Ninja. So yeah, this movie completely changed my life too in so many more ways than you can imagine. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that is all I have, you guys, tonight. Thank you so much for your time. Let's give it up for our